Welcome into the Boys Collective, our NFL draft special right here on 105 Through the Fan here on YouTube. My name is Kevin Gray, of course, and we are joined by our Dallas Cowboys insider from 105 Through the Fan. You can find him on Twitter at Bobby Belt TX. Bobby Belt, who has been working extremely hard getting us ready for the 2022 NFL draft for your Dallas Cowboys. Bobby, what's up? Good to see you, man.
What's up? I remembered. I'm sorry that I didn't remember this earlier. I need to do something for you right off the start. Okay. This is just for you. If I still have it, just sit tight. All right. This is YouTube. We can, there we go. All right. I'm out here representing the brand, going hard right here. Oh, there you go. Right there. That is KG's, dinosaur person.
That is, put some respect on Elena Deladon. I
have some really old backgrounds here I used to troll the nosebleeds like this. Like that's why I had this for Kavanaugh's last show with us. It's I'm all over the place, man.
The YouTubers are going to love this one on 105 Through the Fan already. Again, you can find Bobby on Twitter at Bobby Belt TX. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. We hope that you consume this throughout the day. Obviously, by the time you see this, whether it be on Thursday or late Wednesday night, whenever you see it, you will be able to have hopefully the latest when it comes to the National Football League, the NFL draft, and everything for your Dallas Cowboys. As Bobby, this team picks at number 24 in this year's NFL draft. Rumors starting to fly that maybe the Cowboys could find themselves moving up in the NFL draft, maybe moving back. A lot going on. Give me just your overall thoughts, so before we dive specifically into the Cowboys, about this year's NFL class versus classes, in the last few years, last 3 or 4 years, and how really deep the class is, but really not as top heavy as we've seen over the last maybe 3 to 5 years when it comes to particular draft classes.
Yeah, this draft is incredibly deep. I think that you're going to find guys, and I think you heard Steven speak to some of this during the pre-draft press conference, that maybe the first, second round, it's a little thinner. It's not, the same, number of guys they would normally have graded in there. But you've got enough third, fourth, fifth round type of grades that you could be looking at 7th round pick, or maybe even to undrafted free agency where you've got 5th, 4th round players still out there for you. And that's an unusual thing. And it's part of the COVID year and everything else with guys going back and these super seniors and everything else. And so it's created a real surge that I think we actually might see continue to play out over the next 2 years. I think depth is going to be a big thing over the next year or two, where you're going to still have these guys who, if you were a freshman when the COVID year hit, the NCAA is giving you an option to get an extra year of school. So guys are going to continue to get extra years of school over the next 4 to 5 years. And so I think this is the beginning of a really interesting era for the NFL draft. You're right, though, that it's not very top heavy. Steven said they had 14 to 16 first round grades. That's an unusually low number for them. And so it's going to be really interesting to see people reaching, I think, for not even reaching, because, if you're out of first round grades and it's the top person left on your report, it's the top person left on your report. There's nothing you can do. But it's going to be interesting to see where guys get slotted, where guys go, and, how it plays out, not only in front of Dallas, but then behind them leading into the second round. I think there's going to be a lot of surprises in the top 40.
When you start looking at this year's NFL draft, one thing that kind of talked about and noticed with this particular class is there's no consensus number one, if you will. There's a lot of guys that are in consideration for that number one overall pick with Jacksonville. They're sitting at 1. Is that kind of the feeling that you've gotten around this draft, that there really isn't that a number one consensus guy, that there are multiple guys that you would not be surprised to see go at number 1 or within the top 5, given what a team may be looking for based on who's available in this year's class?
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I'm trying to think here, how many guys could I conceivably see going in the top 5? I think have potential to go top 5. So at the first pick, I think you've got Ike Ekwonu, the tackle from NC State, Trayvon Walker, edge rusher from Georgia, and then you've got Aiden Hutchinson, the defensive end from Michigan. Those all could go there. Detroit, they could go any one of those players. Probably not Ekwonu, but any one of the pass rushers. Then Thibodeau, that's another one that you can add in there. And then I think when you get to Houston could go corner. They could go tackle. So when you talk about the corners, Stingley, Ahmad Gardner could potentially go there. And then if there's a little run on tackles ahead of 5 or 6 or 7, like you're talking about like Cross getting pushed up, I think it's very possible Trevor Penning goes in the top 10, the tackle from Northern Iowa, which probably blew people's minds if you would have asked them that 3 months ago. They thought that's a late first round player. But I think that it's going to be a really interesting set of combinations here. And I'm interested to see how it breaks out, where things go. And I think the Cowboys will be sitting there really watching closely, more closely than normal years. I think they'll be watching closely to see how does the top 10 break out. When we get out of these top 10 players and the smoke kind of clears from this, uncertain group here, are there a couple of guys we really like that are still kind of hanging around there that we got to think, all right, we got to go up for? So I think it's going to be a really interesting draft from the perspective of teams trying to bail out, teams trying to, the handful of them that'll try to come up, and how teams view certain players. They're not going to agree with the media on everything. We're not going to see Dane Brugler's draft board go 1 through 32 just the way he stacked it. So there'll be some surprise. Like we may see a Dane Brugler player who's ranked like 53rd overall go in the teens or something. I'm not saying, that specifically I'm thinking of anybody, but that's the kind of thing that feels like it could happen in this draft.
Just to give you an example, a little bit of the wild variance that we've seen so far, Daniel Jeremiah's latest and final mock draft has come out now, and he has.
When did he drop it? I have not seen it.
So he dropped it as we're recording this about an hour ago.
Okay, all right. DJ's plugged in with Dallas. I'm interested to see who he gave Dallas.
So at number 24, he has the Cowboys selecting Jahan Dotson, the wide receiver out of Penn State, in his final mock draft. Clearly that surprises you based on your reaction right there.
That surprises me given that he knows this team. And I think I've not heard that in fact, I've heard kind of the opposite, that I don't think they'd be interested in a smaller slot receiver there. So that's very interesting to me. I'm going to have to go back and look at that mock. That's puzzling because DJ is not usually off about those things. Who did he give to the Jets at 10? Can you tell me that?
Yeah.
4 and 10.
Yeah, at 10, we'll go to 4 first. At 4, he has the Jets taking Sauce Gardner at 4.
DJ's very plugged in with the Jets.
And then at he actually has the Jets moving up a spot from 10 to 9 to go draft Drake London.
All right. That means London's not going to be in play for the Cowboys, I don't think, because DJ knows the Jets really well.
So just to run down his top 5, he has Trayvon Walker going at 1, Aiden Hutchinson going at 2 to Detroit, Ike Ekwonu going 3 to Houston, Sauce Gardner going 4 to the Jets, and then Evan Neal, the offensive tackle from Alabama, going at 5. You may not like this one. At number 6, he has Charles Cross going to the Carolina Panthers.
That's a pen throw, as Brian Broaddus would say.
And then we'll round out the top 10. Garrett Wilson, wide receiver out of Ohio State, goes at 7 to the Giants. 8, Jameson Williams goes at 8 to the Atlanta Falcons, as we mentioned.
Wow.
Drake London at 9. And then Kayvon Thibodeau in the trade with the Jets, where the Seahawks would go back a spot, they would take Kayvon Thibodeau at number 10.
So number 11, does he go Kyle Hamilton to Washington?
He goes Chris Olave to Washington. Derek Stingley Jr. at 12 to Minnesota. He has Jermaine Johnson going 13 to Houston. He has Jordan Davis going 14 to Baltimore.
That seems like a good
love that pick. Yeah. Kyle Hamilton 15 to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Ooh, not like that in the division. I mean, I think Washington. I see what he says there with Olave. I think Washington takes Kyle Hamilton if he's there. But
and
that's
then
just
16. Trevor Penning to the New Orleans Saints. Kyer Elam goes number 17 to the Chargers.
I love Elam. I have Elam as a first-round player, but not a lot of other people do.
Trent McDuffie at 18 to the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles would get, in this scenario, Kyle Hamilton and Trent McDuffie to really round out their.
I'd be surprised if they came out of the first round there without a receiver or a defensive lineman. That'd be kind of an upset to me.
Okay. Number 19, he has Devin Lloyd going to the Saints. Kenny Pickett at 20 to Pittsburgh. Then Zion Johnson at 21 to New England. And then
Traylon Burks to 22.
Yep.
That one's been whispered for a week now. People are pretty confident on Burks to the Packers.
to Green Bay, and then George Karlaftis at 23 going to the Cardinals.
Man, so Kenyon Green is there, and he has them taking Dotson. That's fascinating.
We'll just round out the rest of them. At 25, he has Breece Hall going to the Buffalo Bills, Tyler Smith going to the Tennessee Titans at 26, Logan Hall going to Tampa Bay at 27. At 28, Quay Walker going to the Packers. And at 29 and 30, both of those picks for the Kansas City Chiefs. You might have to help me. I may mispronounce it. Boye Mafe.
Yep, you got it right, 100%.
Okay. Going to the Kansas City Chiefs. And George Pickens going at 30 to the Chiefs as well. And then the last two picks of the first round, David Ojabo at 31 to Cincinnati. And then Malik Willis actually rounds out the first round going to Detroit.
That is DJ must not like what he hears on that knee with Kenyon Green. Ojabo with the Achilles goes in the first round. A lot of people think he's sliding. And not just that, Tyler Smith from Tulsa. That's and look, I think a lot of people like Tyler Smith. I think the Cowboys think Tyler Smith's a good player. I'd be interested. I'd be surprised if anybody takes Smith with Green still on the board. I'm not saying it's not impossible because DJ's very connected, very plugged in. He knows these things, but that'd be surprising to me.
So does that concern you then that Kenyon Green, and at least with Jeremiah, who the reason why we use his is that, as you mentioned, widely respected around the league in terms of his draft information.
He's a former scout.
Exactly.
Scouts view him as one of their own, so they feel comfortable talking to him. So he gets good information.
So does that surprise you that Green is not in the first round at all based on what Daniel Jeremiah has put out here?
It does, because, and I don't mean this is any sort of like a flex, or I think Daniel knows much more around the league than I do, but I think Daniel and I have probably similar information on Green's knee.
Okay.
And it surprises me that he thinks nobody would want to touch Green in the first round. Because I think that Kenyon Green is look, and I think there are questions even here in Dallas. I don't think they're serious questions, but I think there are questions here in Dallas even about like that knee and what the long-term stability is of it. His issue, apparently he's had some meniscus issues, cleaned out of the right knee a couple times, and he's a big guy. He's 325 pounds or whatever he is. And that's a lot of weight, a lot of pressure to carry around every snap on that knee that some people look like it's breaking down already. But I think some teams view it as a real concern. Other teams view it as like, that's just naturally how you'd expect somebody's knee to look like after they've played lineman for a few years. We're not too worried about it. So some varying opinions, but I'm surprised that he doesn't think even one team would like take the risk on it there.
So let's dive into it specifically then for the Cowboys based on their needs, which we project as of right now. Offensive line, wide receiver, defensive end. Would you say that based on those three, those are the top three needs, not necessarily in order, but those would be the three needs that initially we would look out for as far as the Cowboys are concerned at the moment?
I think you nailed the order correctly, actually. I think they would view their needs. If you ask them to stack their needs like they stack their board, I think they'd stack it offensive line, receiver, and defensive end. And so I think that's exactly what it is. And so this is the receiver and the defensive end class, like we say, it's very deep this year. So I think you feel good about, the receiver class stretching to 56, and you feel good about a defensive end stretching to 88. The offensive line, that would be one that you'd probably need to take care of in the first round, I think. And that's why you hear Jerry talking so specifically about it. Like, hey, we're very likely to take an offensive lineman in the first round. It's your co-host Brian Broaddus here on the Boys Collective. It's like he said back in Philadelphia. It's no mystery. You know what we need. Exactly. You know what players we need.
Yeah,
like you guys see this. It's no mystery. We all know they need help on the offensive line. Definitively, we know they have not filled the starting role at left guard. They are without a starter right now. That's the only spot on the team you could say they are without a starter.
So with that being said, then some of the names that you and others who have been covering this team obviously have put out there that seem like reasonable picks at 24. Let's start with the scenario of them staying at 24. Zion Johnson, Kenyon Green, Tyler Linderbaum, among many names that we've seen from the offensive line standpoint. Wide receivers such as Treylon Burks, maybe a Jahan Dotson in this case from Daniel Jeremiah, and others potentially there. And then defensive ends, I've seen even George Karlaftis being mocked at points to the Cowboys at number 24 as well. Let's start with the offensive lineman. If the Cowboys are there at 24, who is the offensive lineman in your mind that you believe they would take? even with the conversation that we've already started to have with Kenyon Green based on what we've seen from at least Daniel Jeremiah's mock here.
I might blow your mind here. Okay. I heard you mention with the offensive lineman, you said Kenyon Green, Zion Johnson, Tyler Linderbaum. I think in those three players, you named the Cowboys' top center on the board.
Zion Johnson.
Everything I'm hearing lately is that they think Zion Johnson's best position is center here in Dallas.
So what would that mean then for a Tyler Biadasz then?
I think they would view it as like, okay, what if we get Eric Flowers in here? What if we sign Eric Flowers to play guard? The values here with Johnson. I think what they feel like they miss with Tyler Biadasz, where Tyler Biadasz is a little deficient, is in his IDs and his pre-snap stuff that he's doing for the line. That football IQ that they had that was so high with Travis Frederick, I think they feel like that's where it's still missing. I think they think Biadasz is coming along well as a player. Just don't know that they feel like he's coming along as the quarterback of the offensive line like they want the center to be. And so Zion Johnson, what is the two big things we hear about him leading in the draft? We talk about his athleticism, and then what's the other word you hear from everybody? He's so smart. He is so football smart. He's got such a high football IQ. He understands the offensive line inside and out, understands how to identify things. And so I think they could look at that as like, man, we can get a veteran in here off the street to hold it down at left guard. All right. If we can improve center and improve, the communication along the offensive line and not have busts and things like that, that might be it. Now, maybe they don't necessarily play him at center right away. That's possible because, we're talking about potentially if they were to get a left tackle or somebody like that, that left tackle is probably playing left guard for you in the first year. And so, maybe it's the same thing. Maybe they look at Zion and we'll draft him and, hey, we think eventually this guy's a damn good center. We think this is our guy. But for now, we got to hold at left guard. We're going to have him play left guard this first season. And so I think while a lot of people view Zion Johnson as a left guard who could play some other spots, I think the Cowboys view him as he can play left guard. But to us, his best spot is center.
What has been the deal with Linderbaum? Because on the football field, this is a guy who appears is the short arms. Is that really the only thing that people have criticized him for? Because it seems like when you watch him on tape, this is a really good football player, a talented football player.
Size and power, man. That's it. That's it. That's the only thing you can knock him for.
Okay.
You talk about the IQ and the technique. The dude has flawless technique. He is perfect, I think, playing center. And so I would say that you could make an argument nobody plays their position better, more fundamentally sound at any spot in the entire draft than Linderbaum does at center. Which is, I think,
what you would want if you were a team looking for a prospect ready-made to step in right away.
I don't think everybody in the Cowboys war room, for instance, I don't think everybody in these meetings thinks Tyler Linderbaum's length is a problem or his power is a problem. I think that there are a lot of people in there who think like, no, that's a damn good football player and we'd be lucky to have him. I just think that it's a collaborative effort, lots of opinions building together a board. It's not one guy. And so I think that that's where you see some of the effect. I think there are just other voices in that room that have an issue with that. And that's where you see that he may not be as much in the running because they want a stronger consensus. It's like Jerry said the other day, I want everybody in there to believe like they were the ones that they were the ones on the line for this pick. Like they made this pick. They need to believe that and buy into it that way.
So we've gone through a little bit of the offensive lineman there. Wide receiver is really good in this year's class, and there are a number of wide receivers that we've seen in a lot of different spots. When we look at the Cowboys at 24, if they stay there, we've heard names such as Chris Olave, George Pickens, at least in this particular mock, would be available there. But the name that you and a lot of people have really zeroed in on, if he's available there, is a guy in Treylon Burks. What makes him so intriguing as a prospect? The guy coming out of Arkansas, I believe 6'3", physical wide receiver, coming out of Arkansas. Yeah, he has all of the physical gifts that you would want in a really big-bodied wide receiver. What makes him special as a prospect, and why the Cowboys, in your reporting, has been really infatuated with this particular wide receiver?
Because if I told you at pick 24, you can have A.J. Brown. You want him, right? I'll take A.J. Brown at pick 24. Sure, let's go.
Yeah. I've heard Mike Evans comparisons from our very own Brian Broaddus. There's been some
Evans comparisons. The names I've heard thrown around, and these are not just names thrown around like I read them on Twitter. These are names I've heard NFL people use when talking about Treylon Burks. A.J. Brown, Mike Evans, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel. Those are the names that get thrown around. And so to me, it's like, is he raw? Yes. Is he the perfect technician? No. Robert Prince, the new receivers coach, what he wants is technicians at receiver. So, I mean, that may be a tough sell for the coaching staff, but I think the scouts would absolutely vouch for Treylon Burks as the pick if it came down to it. But Burks is a guy that, you're banking on a lot of projection because he's still got to grow into the type of player he is. But I mean, this is a guy who dominated SEC football. The closest thing we have to NFL football outside of the NFL is the SEC, and he dominated it. He would, there was nothing Alabama could do to stop him. Drake London and Treylon Burks, the two things those guys have in common is everybody knew they were getting the ball and they couldn't stop them. That's tough. How often did we see here in Dallas when everybody knew somebody was getting a ball over it, they just key in on that guy and take him away. He's gone. And I mean, that happened to Amari Cooper at times. It happened to CeeDee Lamb when Amari Cooper was out. And so, I think that's an impressive thing to me when I can see everybody knows you're getting the ball and you can't stop it anyway. And that's Treylon Burks. And so Burks is a guy, like I said, there's some rawness there. I think it might be a tough sell to the receivers coach just because he's not the technician that you want. And so I don't know that everybody would be totally on board depending on the board side. I think there's a scenario where it falls the way where they go, yep, we'll take him. But I honestly, at this point, like we kind of said, I don't think he gets to 24. I think he's going 22 to Green Bay.
Well, there's always that wild card there that Burks is an Arkansas guy, and maybe Jerry and Steven fall in love with another Arkansas guy enough to maybe move up to possibly take Treylon Burks there. We'll get into the move-up scenarios here in just a little bit. Before we go to there, we'll finish out with the Cowboys stay at 24, and then their third need that we outlined, defensive end. Now, like I said, mentioned earlier, George Karlaftis is a guy I've seen mocked there. Ojabo seemed like he was a name there before, obviously having the Achilles injury. Is there another guy or two that we aren't necessarily considering that at 24, if the Cowboys decide that they want to address the defensive end spot, that you could see them taking there if they stay at 24 and the board falls their way based on who they have?
I think if you're taking an edge rusher, you're probably wiped out. Okay. It's just one of these things where, hey, this didn't fall the way we wanted. We had some nightmare scenarios in front of us. So we'll settle for this, but I don't think their ideal situation would end with them taking an edge rusher at 24 because I don't think they think the value would be there. Kayvon Thibodeau's not sliding to 24 to them. So in this instance, I think you mentioned Karlaftis. I think that's somebody who could be a wipeout scenario player for them. The only problem there is Karlaftis is, he's not you've already got DeMarcus Lawrence on one side. I think you really want the twitched up edge rusher. You want the bat out of hell. And that's not Karlaftis. Karlaftis isn't a bad athlete. Karlaftis isn't like completely stiff. I mean, there's some stiffness, but he plays with some fluidity. And he's a great technician. He's not just, I think people think of him as like, oh, he must be the stiff, powerful, white defensive end like we're used to seeing who's 280 and just, play. Yeah, that's not him. He's actually a really good technician. He's got like an array of pass rush moves. He knows how to rush the passer. And so Karlaftis, I wouldn't think would be a bad pick at all. There's just not been a ton of buzz there. One of the names to watch on the down low, I think Penn State, Arnold Ebiketie. That's a guy that I think could be in play for them. And that's somebody that Dan Quinn spent a lot of time with at the Penn State Pro Day. And, they don't have a bad history of Penn State picks. Sean Lee,
Micah Parsons. Yeah. Not too bad. Okay. So that's what the Cowboys staying there at 24. Just some names to kind of think about if they do stay there at 24. The real buzz that we have started to hear, starting with you and obviously others who have been close to this team, is the idea that they could move up. Now, Jerry Jones just a couple of weeks ago said, hey, we would be very open to moving up from 24 to 14 to be able to possibly, or not, excuse me, I put out a specific number, moving up from 24 into the first, half of the first round there. One, let's start here. How likely from your reporting or from your hearing that they are ready to move up to 24, and how motivated are they to get up into the top 15 possibly in this year's draft? And with the backdrop of Stephen Jones talking about, hey, we really only have 14 to 16 guys with first round grades in this year's NFL draft.
I really like, I believe it was on the Jeremiah mock, I think you said Penning went 17. Or 16. He went, past
16 to New Orleans. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 16 to New Orleans. I think a sweet spot for them. I think there's a few guys that they'd really like to go up for potentially. Trevor Penning, the tackle from Northern Iowa. Charles Cross, the tackle from Mississippi State, who went really high in Daniel's mock, like 6th. And then I think they'd really be interested in the receiver, Drake London. And in that scenario, Drake London goes 9. And yes. I don't feel great about that because I feel like he knows the Jets in this scenario. And
which
so
makes a lot of sense because they've been desperate for a wide receiver since
Drake London's been penciled in there for so long. Exactly. Anyway, like in the mocks. And so it doesn't surprise me that he'd go there. But I think when we pass pick 11, Washington, because I think at 8, Atlanta likes Drake London. I think at 10, the Jets like Drake London. I think at 11, Washington likes Drake London. And obviously offensive tackles, it's not impossible to think, at least to me, 4 of them could go in the top 10. And so with that, I think when you clear Washington and all right, we've gotten out of here, then there's a little bit of like a chance to breathe and go, okay, here's Houston or here's Baltimore, Houston, or Minnesota, Houston, Baltimore. They're at 12, 13, 14. I think if you clear 11 and any one of Cross, Penning, or London are on the board, I would bet almost anything you will see on the War Room cam, they're picking up the phone and calling people. And they're just trying to figure out, what's it cost to get up? Can we get up in this territory? And so I think that's what they'd be looking at is that if you get in that, I think that's their sweet spot. 12 to 14, if they have one or more of Penning, Cross, or London on the board, I think they'd be interested in, all right, let's see if we can go up here and make a move.
Of those 3, who would you take, 1? And 2, who do you think the Cowboys of those 3, when we're talking about London, Cross, and Penning, do you think they have rated as 1, 2, 3 as who they would like to get if the board fell that way and they were able to move up into that range where they could get one of those 3 players?
I would probably prefer give me the offensive line help. It could be Cross or Penning. I think you get different things from both of them. I think Cross is a better just natural player. I think there's something about Penning you can't teach, just the edge and the intensity that they could really use here. But London would not be a bad pick at all. I mean, he is a true X receiver. The guy I've compared him to is he reminds me of Michael Thomas. And so I think that he'd be great here in this offense with CD and Michael Gallup. But you got to block, you know? Yeah. And so to me, I think I'd lean offensive line. My guess, and I don't know this for sure, but I mean, just talking to some people and reading some tea leaves and I think interpreting things as best as I can. My guess is that their stack of those 3 players will go London, Cross, Penning.
Wow. Even with those 2 offensive linemen there, the wide receiver would still be at the top.
Well, let's consider this. Micah Parsons was above J.C. Horn and Patrick Surtain.
But they were going to take a corner.
They were going to take a corner because even though the stack didn't break out that way, they needed a corner. They were going to take it. They were kind of safe from themselves in a way. I mean, not really. Surtain and Horn were great players too. Yeah, they would have been bad.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Horn got hurt, but he had started out really well in Carolina. So even though I think they have London as the highest of those 3, I think if they were both on the board, I think the eventual tug of war would end with, we got to get the offensive line. And so I think they'd lean towards Cross or Penning as the actual pick. But on their stack, I would not be surprised if it's London, Cross, Penning. I think I feel very confident in saying they have Cross above Penning.
Which is interesting to that point. Stephen Jones said during their pre-draft press conference that, look, if the grades are about even, taking the guy for probably what you need is going to be what you would want to do in that particular scenario if the grades are that close. And it sounds like based on, how you've described it there, that's kind of the thinking that you're going with as well. That
there'd be people fighting for, I think there'd be plenty of people fighting for London. But I think at the end of the day, people would probably go, see, I'm already talking like Steven. At the end of the day, I think that they would go ahead and go that direction with the offensive line. And I think fans would be happier with that. But to ensure you get one of these 14 to 16 first round graded players they have, they're probably going to have to go up to that range, 12 to 14.
What in your mind will it
Which by the way, I made Brian Broaddus, we were at Pluckers on Wednesday, and I made Broaddus like snap his head back at one point. So this is not like a take it to the bank prediction. This is nothing I've been told. This is just after talking to people and hearing that I know they are actively interested in trading up or looking at that option. My gut tells me, I think if you ask me what happens on Thursday night, I say they trade up. I think they go up.
Okay.
And so Brian thinks, I think as least as of Wednesday, it's changing every 20 minutes for everybody right now, their feelings on this. But I think Brian felt more like, I think they just stand in, maybe even trade back if the board doesn't fall quite how they want. But I think they just look at it and go like, we got to go up and get a difference maker. And you heard Steven say it's thin in the first round, it's thin in the second round, it's deep 3 through 5. Okay, well, if it's thin in the first and second, ensure you get the first and don't worry about losing the second because you already think it's thin there anyway.
Yeah, so you might as well do what you need to do to go up there and get the guy that you feel like is within your 14 to 16 grades, which is funny because the Cowboys haven't traded up.
Would you rather get a player you had graded in the second, the third, and then the third again? Or would you rather go get a first and a third?
Yeah, give me the first and the third. Yeah, give me the first and the third, especially if it means I get one of these offensive linemen that I know I can plug and play right away and feel good about not just solidifying the offensive line for the passing game, but what's a little been talked about when it comes to the offensive line is saving it for the running game. Clearly, this team still believes in Ezekiel Elliott as a runner. Obviously, they believe in Tony Pollard in his game. But if you're going to tell me that you're going to believe in Ezekiel Elliott still as a runner, then you might want to go get the nasty offensive lineman that's going to help you improve your running game. Because last year, teams did not respect your passing game because they knew you couldn't run the football. So if you wanted to try and fix this entire offense, to me, it makes the most sense to address the offensive line, which is why I have a little bit of concern that, yes, London would be a fantastic football player within this offense. One, they didn't know how to use a dominant X wide receiver that they had before they got rid of him. So
6 years ago, though, different coordinator, different quarterback is the same, but the quarterback is a different player now, and it's a different coordinator.
Yeah, well, and I'm more so talking about the X receiver they just had that they didn't know how to use.
I thought you meant Des Bryant. That's why I should let you finish what you're saying, KG.
Well, I mean, but both. I mean, it means both still. I mean, they had a dominant X with Dez. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the end of his career, injuries, all the stuff. But then you get Amari Cooper, and when you first get him here, you know how to utilize him. But then as time goes on, however you feel about the player, when he was on the field, which was most of the time actually, and he was actually used correctly, this is one of the better X receivers in the National Football League. So what gives me concern is, why would this offense with this coordinator feel good about using a Drake London in that way when he couldn't use the one that's already a proven commodity in the NFL? Even if you feel like CeeDee Lamb's going to take the next step, you've got to be able to have a plan for a guy in Drake London. And I just wonder what that plan would look like, since you could find one for the receiver that you just got rid of in that way.
It's fair, but I mean, all you can do is build your board. I mean, at the end of the day, if your coaches can't use that guy right, you're going to have a new coaching staff after next year anyway if they can't use the players right. So I mean, either they'll use them right or there'll be new coaches to coach them in 2023.
Which to me makes me want to draft the offensive lineman more. It's weird because I trust Kellen more than I do Joe Philbin at this point, but that's just my own deal I got to deal with. But if you need the offensive line to help both your quarterback and the running back, I'd say that'd be the way to go. But obviously London is an intriguing prospect there when you give in all the physical gifts that he has and what he can mean in this offense as a pass catcher. So we've gone through, if they stay there at 24, if they potentially trade up, who are the guys they may be targeting there. Let's get to a wipeout scenario where the Cowboys, let's say they are there at 20, they stay at 24, and the board, as it starts to fall to them, the offensive linemen are gone, the Pennings of the world are gone, the Crosses, the Johnsons. Let's just throw Kenyon Green in there for this conversation, even though Daniel Jeremiah didn't have him going in the first round at all.
That does concern me that he thinks that.
And then the receivers are gone, the Olaves of the world, the Burkses of the world, the Londons, all of those guys are gone. Who is a player or two that in that scenario where a lot of the guys who you feel like would be probable choices for the Cowboys if they stick at 24, who is there that you would be comfortable with seeing the Cowboys take in that potential doomsday scenario, if you will?
I wonder, there are a few names that I think you're talking outside of those positions, because I don't think I'd want to reach on the position. So at that point, you're talking about taking different positions. Mm-hmm. So you're not talking about you're going to be able to get your edge or anything like that.
Because there's one guy I have in mind in the wipeout scenario who we haven't talked about. Yeah, I'm curious to see if he's one of your guys that they would consider there.
I would like, I wouldn't mind in those scenarios, Dax Hill from Michigan.
Okay.
The safety. Kyler Gordon, the corner from Washington. Mm-hmm. I think that would be an interesting name. if you want to look at these linebackers and Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean and stuff like that,
that's my guy right there. Nakobe Dean, that's my guy right there.
And I think Nakobe Dean would be a wipeout candidate for them. And so, outside of that, that's just my own view, though. I mean, I'm sure if they get truly wiped out, I bet we would be stunned by the name they pick. Like if they get really wiped out, then I think we're going to be kind of caught off guard by like, wow, who was we weren't even talking about that. Like that's the type of unpredictability I think we have here. And if they really, these guys that they've targeted in, I think we've only got even though we think that, Dax Hill is in their range and this guy's in their range and these guys should go around there and they're good players and surely you could use a safety and stuff like that. Like that's just what we think about it. But, we only have gotten kind of the buzz about what they think about the top guys. So if they get into a wipeout, I wouldn't be surprised if it's somebody we haven't connected to them and then we're going to be like, whoa, okay, that's who they went with. We hadn't even been talking about that person. So I think the true wipeout scenario is something we can't even necessarily conceive at this point.
Okay, fair enough. Is there a guy that maybe they would reach for in that scenario that, maybe a name that Dane Brugler actually had in his mock going in the second round, surprisingly, was Sam Williams, the defensive end out of Ole Miss. Is that a guy that stays in the second, third round range? Is he even a fringe first rounder at this point?
Yeah, I think they'd want him in the third. I think they'd be willing to take him in the second as a third round player, but first is a little steep. Maybe Bernard Raymond or Ryman, however you say that, however you want to say that. Michigan. I believe it's German, right? So since it's German, I think it is Ryman. But I mean, if you want to take him, I don't think you'd have him graded there, but if you need an offensive lineman, I don't know, maybe they might trade back and they'd look at, I don't know, maybe it'd be one of these other guys, Cam Jurgens, the center they brought in from Michigan or Nebraska that they talked to. I think what's his name, Tyler Smith, that Tulsa tackle, I think he came into the Dallas Day visits. So I mean, and that's somebody who I think is thought to be like a second or third rounder. So maybe they trade back and they look at something like that. I mean, you never know, but I think that I would probably, my best guess is at that point, if they needed to reach around early on somebody, I think you just got to probably stick to the 30 visit list and go, I don't know, somebody like Ryman is maybe the way that you'd go. But like I said, I think when they get into a true wipeout scenario, we're probably going to be caught off guard. Like, okay, we had no idea.
Okay. So with that being said, we've gone through the Cowboys stay at 24. If they potentially move up in the draft, who they would possibly take, wipeout scenarios based on who may not be there, based on, we've been kind of going through Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft and seeing some surprises based on who he has selected and who's going where. As we now go through the totality of this draft, obviously we've kind of gone through the first round picks, second and third round, which we'll stick for this conversation due to length, of time. As the second and third round grades we go into, who are you looking at in the second and as far as the third round that you feel pretty comfortable with based on who the Cowboys have worked out, who they personally have seen? The guy that comes to mind we just mentioned a second ago, Sam Williams out of Ole Miss, who Dan Quinn had a lot of hands on when he was working him out at his pro day. Who are you looking at in that second and third round based on what we know so far with this team?
So I'd like to see them address offensive line in the first round. And in that case, then I think you'd like to move to receiver in the second round. So do you feel comfortable enough with John Mechie and his ACL at Alabama? Does George Pickens, who you had going 30 there, does he get down a little bit? Do you take him? I think a couple of guys that would be of interest to them potentially around that range could be Christian Watson, the receiver from North Dakota State, and Jalen Tolbert, the receiver from South Alabama. I think those are two guys to at least consider kicking around.
No Sky Moore love around here? No Sky Moore love?
No, I think Sky Moore could. I just don't think Sky Moore's getting to you there. I don't think that he'll get down that far. Yeah. I think Sky Moore can play inside or outside. I think that they would have him in consideration if they're talking about receivers there in the second round, and he got down that far. I just think that's difficult to see happening. But those are some of the names there, I think, in the second round at receiver that I'd be looking at. So then if we're looking at the third round edge, because like I said, I think in their dream scenario, they go tackle, receiver, edge. That's the order that, when I've talked to people, that's what I've heard consistently since January is tackle, receiver, edge. That's the order we'd like to hit it: tackle, receiver, edge, or lineman, receiver, edge. But preferably a tackle who could play guard for a little bit.
Position flex.
Yes, of course. Defensive ends in the third round. I think that would be their sweet spot. They would love to get Sam Williams there from Ole Miss. And then I think some other ones, maybe some low key ones we're not talking about enough. Cameron Thomas, San Diego State. That might be somebody that you could look at there. Dominique Robinson from Miami, Ohio. That's another guy that I think could be of interest there. Alex Wright, UAB. So those are just some of the other names there that could be in play as pass rushers. So I think if you're able to get, let's say you go ahead and you get Kenyon Green at 24, then you go ahead and you're able to get Jalen Tolbert at 56, Sam Williams at 88. I think they come away from that pretty happy, and I think that they then spend rounds 4 through 6 is just like, all right, let's go BPA because we could use depth everywhere. Let's hit it. Let's figure out all right, it's a safety here. We're taking a safety. All right, it's a receiver here. Let's get another receiver then. Let's go ahead. We're just gonna follow the board here and follow our blinking lights like they like to talk about them. But I think as of the moment that we're recording this, and I reserve the right to change my mind in 5 minutes, my best guess is they trade up and get one of the linemen.
Okay.
And so I think it's most realistic. Penning gets to that range a little bit for you, that 12 to 14 range. I don't think he's lasting longer than that. And so if you can go up, I think it's probably Cross, London. Those guys are probably off the board. I've heard some chatter. Cross could get as low as 15. He could get into the teens, but I don't think that's likely. Then I think they make a move up to between 12 and 14. They take Penning. They give up the second round pick, and then they pick again in the third round. And at that point, they just figure out, is the receiver value here or is it defensive end? Whatever they get, then they'll address the other in the fourth. That would be that's my current, as of right now, guess as to what happens.
Tight end, a sneaky need. I keep seeing the name Jelani Woods, who was a 30 visit for the Cowboys as well. Is he a name that could be a third, fourth round?
Third, probably fourth would be tough. I think, we know they visited Kate Otten. I think some of the guys that they didn't visit, in fact, I want to make sure I've got my list in front of me. I think that outside of Otten and Woods, the guys that they visited, I think it's important to remember Charlie Kohler from Iowa State as a potential name. Isaiah Likely is a day 3 name from Coastal Carolina. Daniel Bellinger from San Diego State, who I actually think he could be like the second. There's not a lot of talk about it. I want you to remember this, KG. When Daniel Bellinger goes as one of the first 3 tight ends in the draft from San Diego State, I want you to remember I told you this.
Okay. Because
a lot of people have Daniel Bellinger going in like the 5th, and I don't see there's any. I would bet Daniel Bellinger's the second tight end off the board. But if Bellinger were to slide into the 4th by some miracle, Bellinger, I think, could be in play for them. Kohler, like I said, from Iowa State, Isaiah Likely, and Jake Ferguson from Wisconsin. I think that those are all names that you should, keep an eye on as they look to fill tight ends, in addition to the guys they visited, like Jelani Woods and Kate Otten.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there are going to be plenty of names to choose from. Before we close the show here, our Boys Collective NFL Draft Special right here on 105 Through the Fan here on YouTube. Give me a name or a prospect that is either falling or climbing draft boards based on, the way things are going. Because what I find most fascinating about the NFL draft every single year is the movement of a player or two based on either nothing or something that we may not find as consequential as maybe an NFL team may find as consequential, that would make a player move up and down their board. Case in point, Kayvon Thibodeau, who has apparently been doing a media tour de force over the last, couple of days, has been getting various reaction based on the way that he has communicated or come across on television and how people are feeling about him. Or as you've talked about,
it's not totally made up. There are some questions about not just the branding, but the personality type. I think some people feel
Very
like
mercurial is how it seems like you've described him.
yeah, he's a little emotional at times. He's a little reactive. There's some maturity I think he's still working through. There were a few times at Oregon where something bad would happen last season. He got hurt. They lost Stanford, things like that. And he would like rage quit for a day and tell him he was opting out and he wasn't playing the rest of the year. And so, I mean, those are the type of things that like you hear about. And like, I mean, there's some other things that I can tell you about off the air that I don't think I can, because it's hearsay, but I mean, I can tell you some other stuff. I don't want to say it and put my name on it when I haven't like actually run it down, but I'll tell you that other stuff I know happened. So that's why I'm willing to say that. But there's some questions about Thibodeau.
Is there a player or two that, as you've gone through your entire draft research and talking to people, that you would be either A, surprised that they moved up, or B, surprised that they moved down based on the player or the prospect or whatever the case may be?
That I would be surprised by, or a name I think people should watch out for as potentially moving up or down. I think the name, it was funny for forever. Like a lot of people had Jalen Weidermeyer as like the top tight end. I think it's completely possible he doesn't get drafted. Like, because he's
out of Texas A&M.
It's not just the testing there. He has maturity issues. There's some questions off the field. So that's one that I think some people are starting to catch on to. The one I named for you, Daniel Bellinger, I think that's going to surprise some people. I don't think people realize how much higher the league is on him. So those are ones that stand out to me. I would be surprised on my own personal end. I would be surprised if Kenyon Green falls out of the first round. Even knowing what I know about the knee injury, I would be surprised if that happens. But Daniel Jeremiah, it makes me wonder a little bit. It makes me feel like I got to call somebody.
Because in his mock draft, he did not have Kenyon Green being selected in the first round at all based on his mock draft, which may have some people concerned when they do watch this, when they come to see his mock draft. Based on, again, his mock draft, he has Jahan Dotson, the senior wide receiver out of Penn State, being drafted at number 24 if the Cowboys do stay there at 24. So
interesting call.
Yeah. And only one running back in the first round, Breece Hall.
One more than I think is going. So again, Daniel must know something.
Yeah, that's been the consensus, it seems like, is that there will be no first round running backs taken in this year's class, or anyone that's worthy of that particular class. But actually, he would be a very nice pick for Buffalo, because they really haven't had a true bell cow really at running back since what? LaShawn McCoy?
Yeah, I mean, they've done some committee stuff there, but yeah.
I know they had Singletary for a while, but it didn't really pan out in that way. And then the guy that you were mentioning a little bit earlier, Tyler Smith, going at number 26 to Tennessee.
Which again, I'd be surprised if he goes in the first round. That would surprise me.
Okay. Well, it should be a very, very interesting draft, to say the least. The Dallas Cowboys sitting there at 24. By the time you watch this video, the Cowboys may have moved up in the draft, or they have maybe traded back in the first round of the NFL draft. Either way, there's a lot of intrigue in this year's NFL draft because of the amount of draft eligible players, the deep draft that we've seen, obviously the wide receivers, defensive ends. There's a lot of good players, but maybe not necessarily in the top 30 that you feel like would be in normal years in that range. But we're going to find out. Any last notes that we should pay attention to if you're a Cowboys fan watching this and then seeing the information as it comes out throughout the day, that you want people to pay attention to as we get ready for the NFL draft for the Cowboys?
Again, just watch once we get past Washington. Keep an eye on our Penning, Cross, or London on the board. If they're still on the board when we get to pick 12, just start keeping an eye on the Cowboys to potentially get up there, I think.
Okay. We'll be watching to see if Jerry and or Steven start picking up the phone, possibly to make phone calls to teams in that range to try and get up to where they may need to get a certain player based on where they have them on their board. You can find Bobby on Twitter at BobbyBeltTX, our Dallas Cowboys insider for 105 through the fan. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. We appreciate you joining us on the Boys Collective right here on 105 through the fan, our NFL draft special. Make sure you subscribe to 105 through the fan. Follow us on all of our social media platforms at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And again, you can catch all of the draft coverage all day long on all of our shows. And then, of course, our draft coverage will start at 7 p.m. on 105 through the Fan. Bobby, you will be joined by who on this year's version of the NFL draft for 105 through the Fan?
The party in the first round: Sean Tarif, Brian Broaddus, Kyle Yeomans, Dave Hellman, and then days 2-3, we lose Sean, but everybody else keeps plugging away.
Okay, so you make sure you stay tuned in, turn those notifications on so that you can see when everything drops, and we'll see what the Dallas Cowboys do and see if they can find themselves a quality football player in the NFL draft this year. For Bobby Belt, my name is Kevin Gray. Again, this has been the Boys Collective NFL Draft Special right here on 105 through the Fan on YouTube. Happy NFL Draft Day, and we'll talk to you next time on the Boys Collective. We'll talk to you later. Peace.